Snowflakes descended through the Manhattan night like frozen stars, each one catching the glow of Christmas lights strung across Fifth Avenue storefronts. The black Range Rover navigated through traffic that moved with the sluggish patience of holiday shoppers, its heated interior a cocoon of leather and soft, classical music. Jonathan Hayes sat in the driver's seat, his dark suit jacket draped across the passenger side, tie loosened after 14 hours of back-to-back board meetings that had left him with a headache and the hollow satisfaction of another quarterly earnings beat. "Daddy, can we get hot chocolate after we see the tree?" Emma's voice carried from the back seat, bright with the kind of uncomplicated joy he'd forgotten how to access. "With the marshmallows that look like tiny snowmen?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this 7-year-old miracle who had Rebecca's eyes and his stubbornness, her curls escaping from beneath a white knit hat that Sarah Porter had made by hand. "We can do that, sweetheart, but we need to bundle up first. It's -15 out there." The temperature had dropped with vicious speed after sunset, turning the city into a test of endurance. Jonathan had been monitoring weather reports all day, watching the numbers fall while listening to investors dissect his decision to expand Sinclair Hotels into sustainable building practices. Derek Blackwood had been particularly vocal during the afternoon session, questioning whether environmental initiatives aligned with shareholder value, his tone carrying the particular edge of someone laying groundwork for future attacks. The Range Rover pulled to the curb 3 blocks from Rockefeller Center, close enough to walk but far enough to avoid the crush of tourists. Jonathan killed the engine, already reaching for Emma's coat in the back. She squirmed into it with practiced efficiency, chattering about her art teacher's praise for the watercolor she painted of their penthouse view. "Mrs. Chen said I have an artist's eye. That means I see details other people miss." Emma's pronunciation of details came out careful, deliberate, the kind of concentration she applied to new vocabulary. "Like how the sunset makes the buildings look purple instead of gray." Jonathan helped her with the zipper, his hands performing the task while his mind remained partially tethered to the board meeting, to Derek's insinuations about distracted leadership. The accusation had stung precisely because it contained truth. He had been distracted lately, though not in the way Derek suggested. The distraction was simpler and more damning. Jonathan Hayes, CEO of a $3.2 billion hotel empire, couldn't remember the last time he'd felt anything resembling happiness. They stepped into the cold together, Emma's gloved hand finding his with automatic trust. The city noise surrounded them, car horns, distant laughter, the electric hum of a street vendor's cart selling roasted chestnuts. Christmas music drifted from a nearby shop, some pop version of Silent Night that bore little resemblance to the hymn Rebecca used to hum while cooking Sunday breakfast. 3 years. 3 years since cancer had taken her with methodical cruelty. Since he'd stood in a hospital room holding their newborn son, who'd survived only 90 minutes before his 2 small lungs gave out. 3 years of existing in the space between functioning and living, of being the father Emma needed while feeling like a fraud, of building corporate success on the foundation of personal failure.
"Daddy, you're doing the jaw thing again."
Emma tugged his hand, her observation cutting through his spiral with the precision children deployed when adults thought they were being subtle. "That means you're thinking about sad stuff." He forced his face to relax, manufactured a smile that probably fooled no one. "Just thinking about work, baby girl. Nothing for you to worry about."
"Mrs. Porter says you think about work when you don't want to think about feelings. She says that's called avoidance, and it's not healthy."
Emma delivered this assessment with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting weather conditions.
"I think you should think about happy things instead, like hot chocolate and Christmas trees and how we're together."
The wisdom devastated him. This 7-year-old cutting through 3 years of carefully constructed emotional armor with the simple observation that he was avoiding rather than healing. Rebecca had done the same thing, seen through his executive polish to the damage underneath, refused to let him hide behind quarterly reports and expansion strategies. They walked in silence for half a block, Jonathan processing his daughter's words while she pointed out window displays with running commentary. The Rockefeller tree appeared around the corner, massive and brilliant, covered in lights that transformed it into something almost celestial. Tourists crowded the barriers, phones raised to capture images that could never quite translate the scale, the presence. Emma pulled him closer, eager to join the mass of people. But Jonathan's attention snagged on something peripheral. A bus stop bench, partially visible through the crowd. A figure huddled against the cold in a way that registered as wrong, even from this distance. "Sweetheart, wait here for just a second." He guided Emma to a spot against a building wall, away from foot traffic. "Don't move. I need to check on something." "But Daddy..." "Stay right here." The command came out sharper than intended, executive tone bleeding into father voice. Emma's face showed hurt, but she nodded, recognizing when argument was futile. Jonathan moved through the crowd with the efficiency of someone accustomed to navigation, his height and presence creating space. The bus stop came into clearer view, a wooden bench beneath a flickering route sign, snow accumulating on the seat. And there, curled against the cold, a young woman holding something wrapped in what looked like a threadbare blanket. He stopped 3 feet away, taking in details his mind cataloged with automatic precision. 20 years old, maybe younger, blonde hair tangled with ice crystals, wearing a sweater so thin it might as well have been absent. Her arms clutched the bundle to her chest with desperate strength, and from within the inadequate wrapping came no sound, no movement. Jonathan's heart rate spiked, professional composure evaporating. He closed the distance, crouching beside the bench, his hand reaching out to shake her shoulder with careful urgency. Miss, you can't stay out here. It's too cold." She didn't respond, her skin pale in a way that suggested hypothermia rather than just cold. Jonathan's hand moved to the bundle she held, pulling back the blanket just enough to see a baby. 6 months old at most, his skin showing the bluish tint of dangerous cold exposure, lips darker than they should be, tiny fingers visible and completely still. Not crying, not moving, just existing in that terrible space between life and death that Jonathan recognized from the worst 90 minutes of his existence. Christ. The word came out prayer and curse combined. He stripped off his Armani overcoat without thought, the $3,000 garment landing on dirty concrete as he wrapped it around the baby, tucking fabric around the small body with hands that shook from something other than cold. His phone appeared in his grip, muscle memory dialing 911 while his other hand checked the infant's breathing. Shallow, too shallow, but present. The 911 operator's voice cut through his panic, professional and calm. 911, what's your emergency? Infant hypothermia, bus stop at 5th and 51st. Mother's unconscious, baby's non-responsive. We need immediate medical assistance. Sir, is the baby breathing? Barely. Skin's blue, no visible movement. They've been exposed to -15 temperatures for unknown duration. The operator continued with questions, instructions, reassurances that help was coming. Jonathan provided details while his hands worked, rubbing the baby's arms through his coat, trying to generate warmth, trying to will life back into this tiny stranger who shouldn't be his responsibility, but had become so the moment he'd seen them. Movement beside him, the woman stirring, consciousness returning in jerking stages. Her eyes flew open, wild with panic, her arms reaching for the bundle he'd taken. "No!" The word came out cracked, desperate. "Don't touch him! Don't take my baby!" Jonathan shifted so she could see her son still in her arms, just wrapped in better insulation. "I'm not taking him. He's hypothermic. Ambulance is coming." She tried to sit up, failed, her body betraying the weakness of prolonged cold exposure. I can't afford." Each word required effort, her jaw trembling too hard for easy speech. "You don't pay. I pay." Jonathan kept his voice level, the same tone he used in board meetings when establishing non-negotiable positions. "Your baby is dying. That's not a debate." Her eyes found his face, searching for deception, for the angle, for whatever price people like him always extracted from people like her. Jonathan held her gaze, let her see whatever she needed to see, willing her to accept help before pride killed her child.
I don't even know you.
My name is Jonathan Hayes. I own Sinclair Hotels. I have a daughter your age. And right now, none of that matters except getting your baby warm. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a black American Express card, held it where she could see. This pays for everything. No debt, no obligation. Just medical care. Sirens cut through the night, growing louder. The young woman's face crumpled, tears freezing on her cheeks, her body curling around her baby in a gesture Jonathan recognized from every parent who'd ever felt helpless.
His name is Noah.
The words came out broken.
He's 6 months old.
I've kept him alive for 6 months, and now you're keeping him alive by accepting help. Jonathan stood as the ambulance arrived, paramedics moving with practiced efficiency. He stepped back, giving them space, watching as they assessed the baby with quick competency. A hand tugged his sleeve. Emma stood beside him, her face showing the particular solemnity children adopted when witnessing adult crisis.
Daddy, is the baby going to die?
Not if I can help it. He lifted her, settling her on his hip despite her protests that she was too old to be carried. We're going to make sure he gets help. The paramedics loaded mother and child into the ambulance, one of them pausing to take Jonathan's information, insurance details, the promise that Sinclair Hotels would cover all expenses. Jonathan provided everything without hesitation, his mind already calculating, call his attorney, arrange private room, assign security, ensure no paperwork blocked treatment. Sir, you come into the hospital? The paramedic's tone suggested he'd asked twice already. Jonathan looked at Emma, who looked back with Rebecca's eyes and that particular expression that said she was judging his character in real time. We're coming. The ride to Mount Sinai happened in surreal quiet. Emma pressed against his side in the ambulance's jump seat, watching the paramedics work with wide eyes. The young woman, Grace, according to the ID the paramedics had found, remained conscious but disoriented, answering questions in fragments while they worked to stabilize Noah's temperature. Emergency rooms operated with a rhythm Jonathan had come to know too well during Rebecca's final months. The organized chaos, the smell of antiseptic and fear, the way time moved differently when someone you cared about was beyond your help. He shouldn't care about these strangers. They were a charitable impulse, a good deed, the kind of thing wealthy men did to assuage guilt about having too much while others had nothing. But watching Grace clutch Noah while doctors swarmed, seeing the terror in her eyes that mirrored what he'd felt holding his dying son, Jonathan felt something crack in the protective ice he'd built around anything resembling emotion. This wasn't abstract charity. This was visceral, immediate, the kind of help that mattered because it was needed right now rather than filtered through foundations and tax write-offs. A doctor emerged after 40 minutes that felt like days. The baby's stable. We've got him warming gradually, started fluids. He's young, resilient. Barring complications, he should recover fully. The relief that washed through Jonathan was disproportionate to his actual connection to the situation, but he felt it anyway, this loosening in his chest that came from crisis averted. And the mother? Mild hypothermia, malnutrition, exhaustion. We're admitting her overnight for observation. She's asking for you. Jonathan glanced at Emma, who'd fallen asleep in a waiting room chair, her head pillowed on his folded coat. Can I bring my daughter? Keep it brief. The patient needs rest. Grace looked small in the hospital bed, IVs running into her arm, heated blankets piled around her. Her eyes tracked Jonathan as he entered, Emma stirring enough to walk but staying pressed to his side. Noah? The question came out hoarse. Stable. Doctor says he'll be fine. Jonathan stopped at the foot of the bed, maintaining distance, trying to project non-threatening presence. They want to keep you overnight. I can't pay for this. Her hands twisted in the blanket, restless with anxiety that went beyond immediate crisis. I don't have insurance. I don't have anything. I told you, I'm paying. No debt, no strings. Grace's laugh was bitter, exhausted.
Men like you don't give without strings. I've learned that lesson enough times.
Emma spoke before Jonathan could respond, her voice carrying the sleepy certainty of someone operating on pure honesty. Daddy doesn't do strings. When Mommy died, he paid for Mrs. Chen's son's college because she took care of me when Daddy was sad. He didn't want anything back. He just helped. The observation landed in the sterile room with unexpected weight. Grace's expression shifted, suspicion warring with desperate hope, the look of someone who'd been burned too many times to trust easily, but couldn't afford to refuse help. Your mother died? Her eyes moved to Jonathan, reassessing. 3 years ago. Cancer. The words came out flat, practiced, the version he gave at charity galas when people expressed condolences that meant nothing. I understand what it means to be alone, even when you shouldn't be. Grace studied him for a long moment, her exhaustion making her defenses transparent. What do you want from me? Nothing tonight. Tomorrow, we talk about options. Tonight, you sleep knowing Noah is safe and warm and being monitored by people who know what they're doing. Jonathan pulled a business card from his wallet, set it on the bedside table. My cell number's on there. You need anything, food, clothes, someone to check on Noah? You call me directly. Why are you doing this? The question held genuine confusion rather than suspicion now, as if kindness without motive was a concept she couldn't quite process. Jonathan thought about that, about the real answer versus the easy one. The real answer was complicated. Guilt over having too much, grief seeking outlet, the hollow recognition that his wealth meant nothing when it couldn't save the people he actually loved. The easy answer was simpler, and just as true, because your baby was dying and I could help. That's reason enough. He left before she could respond, gathering Emma and heading for the exit where his driver waited with the Range Rover. The night had turned colder, if that was possible, the city transforming into something crystalline and sharp. Emma fell asleep against him in the car, her breathing evening into the rhythm of childhood, where crisis could be processed and released rather than carried for years. Jonathan's phone buzzed with messages he'd been ignoring. Derek Blackwood wanting to discuss the board meeting, his attorney with questions about the Tokyo expansion, Sarah Porter asking if they needed dinner held. He answered only Sarah, texting that they'd eaten and would be home soon. Nothing about the detour that had consumed the evening. The penthouse was dark when they arrived, 60 floors above street level, insulated from the noise and cold and human suffering that existed at ground level. Jonathan carried Emma to her room, tucked her into bed, still wearing her clothes, because waking her seemed cruel after the night they'd had. She stirred enough to mumble something about the freezing baby, her subconscious still processing what she'd witnessed. He's going to be okay, sweetheart. We helped him. Good. Mommy would want us to help people who need it. Emma's eyes opened briefly, finding his face in the dim light from the hallway. She told me before she died that helping people is how we stay human, instead of just being rich and sad. The words hit like physical blows. Rebecca's wisdom filtered through their daughter's memory, becoming directive rather than observation. Jonathan had spent 3 years being rich and sad, building walls between himself and anything that might penetrate the numbness, existing rather than living, because living hurt too much. He kissed Emma's forehead, whispered love into her curls, then retreated to his own room, where floor-to-ceiling windows showed Manhattan spread below like a circuit board, all light and geometry and calculated beauty. The city from this height looked nothing like the city at street level, where people froze on benches and babies died from exposure, while thousands walked past. Sleep didn't come easily. Jonathan lay in bed, staring at ceiling shadows, his mind replaying the evening. Grace's desperate grip on Noah, the baby's blue-tinged skin, Emma's observation about helping versus staying rich and sad. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent now, but he knew morning would bring the usual deluge. Board meetings, investor calls, Derek's continued campaign to position himself as heir apparent to leadership. Jonathan hadn't realized he was relinquishing. Somewhere in the hospital, Grace Miller lay awake in a bed she couldn't afford, her baby monitored by equipment she could never pay for, accepting help from a stranger because the alternative was death. What happened tomorrow? What happened when medical crisis became logistical crisis? When Noah was well enough to discharge, but Grace had nowhere to take him, no way to keep him fed and warm and safe. Jonathan had built an empire on calculated risks, on seeing opportunities others missed, on understanding that sometimes the best investment was the one that didn't make immediate financial sense. He'd bought struggling properties and transformed them, hired people others considered unemployable, and watched them thrive. Built success on the foundation of seeing potential rather than just current state. Grace Miller had potential. He'd seen it in her sketchbook, left behind on the bus stop bench, filled with drawings that showed genuine talent, despite being rendered in cheap pencil on cheaper paper. She had talent and determination, and the kind of pride that refused to accept charity without resistance. All qualities he respected. All qualities that suggested she'd succeed given opportunity. But this wasn't business. This was a 20-year-old homeless mother with a 6-month-old baby, no family support, no resources, no path forward that didn't involve government assistance and cyclical poverty. The smart move was to pay her hospital bills, maybe arrange temporary housing through one of Sinclair Hotel's charity partnerships, then step back before obligation became entanglement. The smart move. The safe move. The move that let him return to being rich and sad without the complication of actually helping beyond the immediate crisis. Emma's voice echoed in memory. Mommy would want us to help people who need it. Rebecca would have already been planning, already been on the phone with social workers and housing advocates, already been treating Grace Miller as a person deserving of comprehensive support rather than transactional charity. Rebecca had possessed that rare quality of seeing people as more than their circumstances, of believing that everyone deserved dignity regardless of their bank balance. Jonathan reached for his phone, typed a message to his executive assistant. Need comprehensive background check on Grace Miller, age approximately 20, currently at Mount Sinai. Also pull records on anyone named Miller who attended Parsons School of Design in the last 5 years. Want results by 9 a.m. Then another message, this one to his head of HR. We're creating a new position, graphic designer, temporary contract, housing and childcare included. Comp package competitive but not excessive. I'll send candidate details tomorrow. He sent both messages before second guessing could intervene, committing to a course of action that Derek Blackwood would absolutely use as ammunition for the distracted leadership narrative. But Jonathan had spent 3 years making every decision through the filter of what protected the company, what served shareholders, what maintained his reputation as ruthlessly effective CEO. 3 years of being exactly what the business required while hollowing out everything else. Maybe it was time to make decisions that served something other than quarterly earnings. His phone buzzed. Sarah Porter, still awake despite the late hour. The message was brief. I raised Miss Rebecca from age 6. She would be proud of what you did tonight. She would also tell you that helping halfway is worse than not helping at all. Think about that before morning. Jonathan smiled despite the weight of the day, despite the complicated mess he'd just created for himself. Sarah Porter had known Rebecca longer than he had, understood her better in some ways, served as moral compass when his own North Star had died in a hospital delivery room. Helping halfway is worse than not helping at all. The statement settled into his chest with uncomfortable accuracy. He'd helped Grace and Noah through immediate crisis, but crisis didn't end when the ambulance left. Crisis was shelter and food and clothing and the 1,000 small things that separated survival from actual living. Crisis was having a safe place to sleep and someone to trust and a path forward that didn't require choosing between pride and need. He could provide that, not through charity or pity, but through opportunity. A job that used Grace's actual skills, housing that didn't feel like handout, childcare that let her work without abandoning Noah. He could create circumstances where she saved herself rather than being saved, where his wealth served as catalyst rather than solution. The plan took shape through the small hours of morning, detail layering onto detail, until Jonathan found himself at his desk, drafting an employment offer that violated every HR protocol Sinclair Hotels had established. Housing included, childcare subsidized, flexible hours, performance-based advancement rather than tenure requirements. Eric would have a field day with this when he found out. The board would question whether emotional decision-making was compromising Jonathan's judgment. Investors would wonder if personal issues were affecting corporate strategy. Let them wonder. Let them question. He'd spent 3 years being exactly what they wanted: focused, driven, emotionally unavailable. It had built them wealth while costing him everything that actually mattered. Morning light crept across Manhattan, transforming buildings from shadow into definition. Jonathan showered, dressed in another suit that cost too much, prepared for another day of meetings and decisions and the performance of leadership. But something had shifted during the night. Some fundamental recalibration of what mattered versus what he'd been told should matter. Emma appeared at breakfast looking thoughtful, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, while Sarah Porter moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. "Are we going to see the baby today?" Her question was casual, but her eyes showed the same intensity she applied to art projects that mattered. "To make sure he's still okay?" "We are, after your school." "What about the baby's mommy? Is she still in the hospital?" "She is. They're keeping her for observation." Emma absorbed this, her fork pausing mid-air. "Mommy used to say that when bad things happen to good people, it's our job to help make things less bad. She said that's called being human instead of just being alive." Jonathan set down his coffee, his full attention on his daughter, on this 7-year-old philosopher who kept channeling Rebecca's wisdom at precisely the moments he needed to hear it. Mommy was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. "So we're going to help them? Not just today, but until things are less bad?" The question was simple, direct, the kind children ask when they hadn't yet learned to complicate morality with logistics. "We're going to help them, as much as they'll let us." Emma's smile was genuine, relieved, as if she'd been testing him and he'd finally passed. "Good. Because walking away when people need help would make us the kind of people Mommy wouldn't like." She returned to her breakfast, crisis resolved, while Jonathan sat with the weight of having his 7-year-old daughter hold him accountable to standards he'd let slip. Rebecca wouldn't like the man he'd become: successful, wealthy, emotionally unavailable, treating relationships as transactions and measuring worth in profit margins. But maybe it wasn't too late to become someone she would recognize, someone Emma wouldn't be ashamed to call father. Someone who helped, not because it looked good or served corporate image, but because people needed it, and he could provide it. His phone buzzed, the background check results arriving early, his assistant demonstrating the efficiency that justified her 6-figure salary. Jonathan opened the file while finishing his coffee, scanning details that painted a picture of systematic failure rather than individual failing. Grace Elizabeth Miller, age 20, former student at Parsons School of Design, scholarship recipient, focus on illustration and graphic design. Withdrawn from program 18 months ago due to pregnancy, no record of return. Father Michael Miller, deceased 4 years prior. Mother Linda Miller, remarried, current location Westchester. Siblings: 1 younger brother, current address same as mother. So Grace had family, but not family willing to help, which suggested estrangement serious enough to leave her homeless rather than asking for support. The Parsons detail confirmed what he'd suspected: real talent, real training, real potential, derailed by circumstances rather than capability. Another message from his assistant. Parsons' registrar confirmed Miller was top 10% of class before withdrawal. Professor Kendrick, illustration department, remembers her as exceptionally gifted with strong commercial instincts. Can provide reference if needed. Jonathan forwarded the information to HR with instructions to draft the offer letter, then checked the time. 8:30. Emma would leave for school in 15 minutes. Hospital visiting hours started at 9. He had until then to decide exactly how to approach Grace Miller with an offer that would either be accepted as opportunity or rejected as manipulation. The intercom buzzed, building security announcing Derek Blackwood in the lobby, requesting permission to come up. Jonathan's jaw tightened, the tell Emma had learned to read, the physical manifestation of stress he thought he concealed. Send him up. Derek arrived with the casual authority of someone who'd spent decades in corporate environments. His suit precisely tailored, his silver hair impeccable despite the early hour. They'd known each other 20 years, had built Sinclair hotels together when it was a regional chain rather than international empire. Derek had been his father's protege, had expected to inherit leadership when the old man died, had instead watched Jonathan, younger, less experienced, but family, take the CEO position. Bit early for social calls, Derek. Jonathan remained at the breakfast table, didn't stand, making Derek come to him rather than meeting his equals. Wanted to catch you before the day consumed us both. Derek accepted coffee from Sarah Porter with a nod that pretended at friendliness while treating her as furniture. We need to discuss yesterday's board meeting, specifically your response to concerns about divided focus. My focus is fine, is it? Derek settled into a chair uninvited, his posture suggesting casual conversation despite words carrying threat. You left an investor call early Tuesday, missed the Tokyo strategy session Thursday, and last night you disappeared entirely during what should have been networking time at the Waldorf charity function. Jonathan sipped coffee, buying time to construct response that didn't reveal too much. I had a personal matter that required attention. Personal matters that supersede business obligations suggest priorities shifting in directions shareholders won't appreciate. Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm not trying to undermine you, Jonathan. I'm trying to protect the company we built. But if you're not fully committed, I'm committed to building a company that does more than generate profit. Jonathan set down his cup with deliberate care. If that's a problem for you or the board, we can discuss it at next quarter's meeting.
It becomes a problem when personal charity projects interfere with fiduciary responsibility.
Derek leaned forward, dropping pretense of friendliness. I know about the hospital bills. Mount Sinai. Homeless woman and baby. Very generous, very public, very exploitable by competitors. Wondering if our CEO's judgment is compromised by what? Grief? Guilt? Midlife crisis? The casual weaponizing of Jonathan's help, the reduction of human need to corporate liability, ignited something that had been building through the night. I spent 3 years being exactly what this board wanted. Focused, driven, treating every decision through the lens of profit maximization. It made you all very rich and cost me everything that actually mattered. So yes, Derek, my priorities are shifting. If that threatens your position, perhaps you should consider whether you're actually committed to what Sinclair Hotels should represent. Derek's expression went cold, professional courtesy evaporating. The board will want to discuss this evolution in your thinking, particularly as it relates to your ability to lead during our expansion phase. Let them discuss it. Schedule the meeting. Jonathan stood, the breakfast finished, the conversation reaching its natural conclusion. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a prior commitment that takes precedence over managing your insecurity. He walked Derek to the door, closed it with finality that probably violated 20 years of professional relationship, then leaned against it, feeling something like liberation. The conflict was coming. Derek would weaponize last night's help, would paint it as judgment compromise, would use it to build case for leadership change. The smart move would be to back down, reassure the board, let Grace Miller become footnote in corporate maneuvering. But Jonathan had already made the smart move for 3 years. It was time to make the right move instead. Mount Sinai's pediatric ward hummed with the controlled chaos of morning rounds. Doctors moving between rooms, while monitors beeped their reassuring rhythms. Jonathan stood outside the room where Noah Miller slept in a plastic bassinet, his small chest rising and falling with the steady breathing that meant crisis had passed into recovery. The baby's color had returned to something approaching healthy pink, the bluish tint of hypothermia replaced by the flush of maintained body temperature. Grace sat in a chair beside the bassinet, her hand resting on Noah's stomach through the blanket, her eyes tracking every breath with the hypervigilance of mothers who'd watched their children come too close to death. She'd been awake when Jonathan arrived, despite the early hour, her hospital gown replaced by clothes someone, a nurse probably, had donated from the lost and found. Jeans too big, a sweatshirt advertising a college she'd never attended, Socks with cartoon characters that would have been charming if the entire ensemble didn't scream charity case. She looked up when Jonathan entered, her expression wary despite the exhaustion etched into features too young to carry this much damage.
They said he can be discharged this afternoon, if I have somewhere to take him.
The conditional hung in the sterile air, heavy with implications both understood. Jonathan pulled the visitor chair closer, maintaining enough distance to avoid crowding, close enough to speak without the entire floor hearing. I have a proposal. Not charity. An employment opportunity. Grace's laugh was short, bitter.
I'm 20 years old with a 6-month-old baby and no degree. What kind of employment opportunity could I possibly qualify for?
Graphic designer. Contract position with Sinclair Hotels. Your portfolio from Parsons shows commercial instinct we need for our new sustainable luxury campaign. 12-month contract. Renewable based on performance. Compensation competitive with industry standard for your experience level. Jonathan pulled out his phone, opened the formal offer his HR team had drafted at 4 a.m. Housing included. Furnished apartment in a building we own in Brooklyn, utilities covered. On-site childcare at our flagship hotel during business hours. Health insurance effective immediately. He watched her face process the information, suspicion warring with desperate need, pride trying to construct barriers against what looked too good to be real.
You're offering me a job because you feel sorry for me.
I'm offering you a job because you're talented, and I need talent. The housing and childcare are standard benefits for positions requiring flexible hours and family accommodation. Half our housekeeping staff use the childcare facility. Not entirely true, but close enough to truth that the stretch felt justified. This isn't pity, Grace. This is investment in someone who showed up at Parsons on scholarship and made top 10% of their class before circumstances intervened. Her eyes widened slightly at the detail, the proof he'd done homework rather than making charitable impulse.
You investigated me.
I investigate everyone I hire. Would you prefer I offer positions to strangers without verifying their qualifications? Grace's hands twisted in her lap, fingers worrying at loose threads in the donated jeans.
What if I'm terrible at it? What if I take your offer and fail, and then we're homeless again, but now I've wasted your time and money?
The vulnerability underneath the question cut through Jonathan's professional detachment, revealing the terrified girl beneath the defensive pride. Then we adjust. Maybe design isn't the right fit, and we find something that is. Maybe you need additional training, and we provide it. The contract includes performance reviews every quarter, with the opportunity to shift roles if needed. This isn't a one-chance situation, Grace. This is a door opening. What you do once you walk through it determines the rest. She looked at Noah, at this tiny human who depended entirely on her next decisions, her ability to swallow pride and accept help that felt like handout, even when packaged as opportunity.
I don't know you. I don't know if I can trust you.
No, you can't. Not yet. Trust gets earned through action, not promises. Jonathan stood, giving her space to process without his presence pressuring response. I'm leaving the offer letter with the nurse's station. You have 24 hours to decide. If you say yes, I'll have an apartment ready by this evening and a start date for next Monday. If you say no, I'll still cover the hospital bills and arrange temporary housing through our corporate charity partnerships. Either way, you and Noah will be okay. He reached the door before her voice stopped him, quiet, but carrying across the room with unexpected strength. Why are you doing this? The real reason, not the corporate justification. Jonathan turned back, meeting her eyes with the kind of honesty he usually reserved for Emma when she asked questions that deserved real answers. 3 years ago, I held my son while he died. 90 minutes old, born too early, lungs too small. I had $3 billion and the best doctors money could buy, and none of it mattered. He died anyway. The words came out flat, stripped of emotion through repetition at therapy sessions he'd stopped attending after 6 months. Last night, I watched another baby dying from exposure, while the richest city in the world walked past doing nothing. I couldn't save my son, but I could save yours. Maybe that makes this about me more than you. Maybe it's selfish. But Noah's alive because I stopped, and that has to count for something." Grace's face showed something like understanding, the recognition of shared trauma creating bridge between worlds that normally never touched.
"I'm sorry about your son."
"I'm sorry you had to make the choice between pride and survival. But you're still making choices, Grace. That's what matters." He left before the conversation could deepen into territory neither was ready to navigate, before the hospital's antiseptic air could suffocate the fragile connection they'd just established. Emma waited in the hallway with Sarah Porter, having insisted on coming despite school starting in an hour, her need to verify the baby's survival outweighing educational obligation. "Is he okay?" Her question was immediate, urgent. "He's okay. They're both okay." Emma's shoulders dropped with visible relief, the tension she'd been carrying since last night finally releasing. "Did you help them? Like really help, not just hospital help?" "I offered. Whether they accept is up to Grace." "She'll accept." Emma delivered this with the certainty of someone who'd never experienced the kind of pride that made accepting help feel like defeat. "Because not accepting would be stupid, and she doesn't seem stupid." Sarah Porter's expression suggested amusement carefully concealed, her hand resting on Emma's shoulder with the casual authority of someone who'd helped raise this child from birth. "Miss Emma needs to get to school, Mr. Hayes. And you have that conference call with the Tokyo investors in 40 minutes. The reminder pulled Jonathan back to the reality waiting outside hospital walls. Board meetings and Derek's maneuvering, and the expansion deal that would determine Sinclair Hotel's position in Asian markets for the next decade. He'd already missed 2 calls about the Tokyo property, already given Derek ammunition by prioritizing personal crisis over corporate opportunity. They rode to Emma's school in relative silence, the morning traffic giving Jonathan time to check messages that had accumulated overnight. His assistant had sent preliminary numbers on the sustainable luxury campaign that would justify Grace's hiring to anyone who questioned it. Derek had copied him on an email to board members about maintaining focus during critical expansion phases that was clearly laying groundwork for future confrontation. The Tokyo investors had rescheduled for this afternoon, the delay costing leverage in negotiations that were already delicate. "Daddy, you're doing the jaw thing again." Emma's observation cut through his mental calculation of how much Derek's interference was costing in actual dollars versus reputational damage. "Are you worried about the baby or about work?" "Both." Honesty felt simpler than evasion with Emma, who had inherited Rebecca's ability to detect emotional dishonesty at 50 paces. "Some people at work think I'm making bad decisions because I'm distracted." "Are you distracted?" "Probably." Emma considered this with the gravity she applied to questions that mattered. "Mommy used to say that paying attention to people who need help isn't distraction. It's being human." She said the really distracted people are the ones who only think about money and forget there are actual people attached to the numbers. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy, Rebecca's philosophy delivered through their daughter's innocent repetition. Jonathan had spent 3 years being exactly what Derek and the board wanted, focused exclusively on numbers, treating people as resources to optimize rather than humans deserving consideration. It had built shareholder value while hollowing out everything else. Mommy was right about that. She was right about most things. Then you should keep helping the freezing baby lady even if the work people think it's distracting. Emma gathered her backpack as they pulled up to her school, a private institution in the Upper East Side where tuition cost more than many families' annual income. Because if you stop helping people just because other people don't like it, you're letting them make you into someone Mommy wouldn't recognize. She kissed his cheek and disappeared into the building before Jonathan could construct response, leaving him with the weight of being judged by his 7-year-old and found wanting. Sarah Porter settled into the front passenger seat, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant she had opinions she was choosing not to voice. Miss Rebecca would be proud. Her words were quiet, definitive. Not of the business success, she never cared much about that, but of last night, of this morning's offer, of choosing the hard, right thing over the easy wrong thing. Derek's gonna use this to push me out. Let him try. Sarah's tone carried steel that reminded Jonathan she'd worked for his family 40 years, had seen corporate wars come and go, had perspective he sometimes lacked. Miss Rebecca used to say that people who threaten your position over doing good are people whose opinion shouldn't matter. She'd tell you to help that girl. Consequences be damned. The conference call with Tokyo investors happened from his office, Jonathan navigating technical questions about construction timelines and regulatory approval while his mind kept circling back to whether Grace would accept the offer. The deal was solid. A luxury property in Shibuya that would establish Sinclair Hotel's presence in Japan's most competitive market. $200 million investment with projected returns over 15 years. The kind of strategic expansion that built empires. Derek joined the call uninvited, his video feed showing him in his own office, positioned to look collaborative while subtly undermining Jonathan's responses with questions about leadership capacity and strategic focus. The Tokyo team was too professional to react visibly, but Jonathan could read the shift in their questions, the increased probing about Sinclair's stability and long-term vision. The call ended with commitment to follow-up meetings, no concrete decisions, the deal sliding further from certainty because Derek had successfully planted doubt about Jonathan's ability to execute. Jonathan killed the video feed and stared at his computer screen, doing math on how much Derek's interference had just cost in real terms versus reputational damage versus the exhausting calculation of whether fighting this was worth the energy required. His assistant knocked, entered with the careful deference of someone delivering news she knew wouldn't be welcome. The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Mr. Blackwood's office sent the agenda. It's focused on leadership effectiveness and strategic priorities. Of course it is. Also, Mount Sinai called. Grace Miller accepted the employment offer. She's asking when she can see the apartment and start orientation. The second piece of news should have been simple positive update, but Jonathan felt it land as complication rather than resolution. Grace accepting meant commitment extending beyond immediate crisis, meant Derek would absolutely weaponize this as judgment compromise, meant board meeting tomorrow would center on whether personal charity was affecting professional capability. He could still back out, tell Grace the position had been filled, offer different support that didn't tie her to his company, remove the ammunition before Derek could use it. The smart move. The politically safe move, the move that protected his position while abandoning the girl who'd trusted his offer enough to accept it. Tell her the apartment's ready this evening. Have orientation scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m., and make sure childcare is prepared to accommodate Noah starting immediately. His assistant nodded, made notes, hesitated at the door. Sir, if I may, what you're doing for her is really kind. Don't let Mr. Blackwood make you question that. She left before Jonathan could respond. The rare personal opinion from someone usually scrupulously professional landing with weight precisely because of its rarity. His phone buzzed. Emma's school. The caller ID triggering immediate spike in anxiety that came from too many crisis calls during Rebecca's illness. Mr. Hayes, this is Principal Morrison. I'm calling because Emma had an incident during recess. She's fine physically, but we need you to come in to discuss what happened. The drive to Emma's school took 20 minutes through midday traffic, Jonathan's mind constructing scenarios that ranged from minor playground dispute to medical emergency, despite the principal's reassurance. He found Emma in the main office, looking defiant rather than upset, her knuckles showing the kind of redness that suggested recent physical contact. Principal Morrison was a woman in her 50s who'd seen enough privileged children to be unimpressed by wealth or status, her expression mixing concern with exasperation. Emma was involved in a physical altercation during recess. She punched another student. Jonathan looked at his daughter, who met his gaze with the stubborn set of jaw he recognized from his own mirror. Emma, what happened? Tyler said homeless people are lazy and deserve to be cold because they don't work hard enough. He said his dad says people who give money to homeless people are stupid because it just makes them dependent. Her voice was steady, factual, building case rather than making excuse. So I told him his dad was wrong and ignorant, and he pushed me. So I punched him. The principal sighed,
the sound carrying years of mediating conflicts between children parroting their parents' worst instincts. Tyler Mitchell does have a bruised lip.
His parents are considering whether to press charges or file complaint with the school board. His parents can do whatever they want. My daughter defended someone who needed defending. Jonathan felt protective instinct override diplomatic response, the same fierce need to shield Emma that had driven him to excessive caution for 3 years. If Tyler's father is teaching him to dehumanize homeless people, maybe the Mitchells need to examine their parenting choices before criticizing mine. Emma's expression showed surprise, then gratitude, the look of a child who'd expected punishment and received validation instead. Principal Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, her professional neutrality cracking enough to show approval underneath. While I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Hayes, we can't have students resolving disagreements with violence. Emma will serve detention this week and write an apology letter to Tyler. I'll write that I'm sorry I punched him, but I'm not sorry I defended people who deserve defending. Emma's voice carried quiet conviction that made Jonathan's chest tight with complicated pride. If that's not good enough, I can write it again until I get it right. But I won't apologize for the truth. They left the school with detention scheduled and Emma's hand in his, her small fingers gripping tight as if expecting him to be angry rather than conflicted about whether to punish or praise her. Am I in trouble? You're in detention, which is its own kind of trouble. But no, baby girl, I'm not angry. He searched for words that balanced teaching restraint with validating courage. I'm proud you stood up for what's right. I wish you'd done it without punching someone, but I'm proud you cared enough to act. Tyler's dad is Mr. Blackwood's friend. They play golf together and talk about business. I heard them at the winter fundraiser saying homeless people just need to work harder and stop expecting handouts. Emma looked up at him, her eyes holding questions she was old enough to ask, but still too young to fully understand. Is that what you think? About Grace and Noah? No. I think Grace is working harder than most people I know just to survive. I think she deserves opportunity, not judgment. Jonathan squeezed her hand, feeling the weight of being measured by his daughter against standards he'd helped Rebecca instill. And I think you're braver than I am for saying so out loud. They stopped for lunch at a diner Emma loved, the kind of place where food came fast and cheap and nobody cared about expensive suits or corporate hierarchies. Emma ordered pancakes despite it being afternoon, her small rebellion against school cafeteria that served quinoa salads and organic proteins. Jonathan picked at a burger while watching his daughter drown pancakes in syrup, her earlier defiance mellowing into something approaching contentment. When can we see Noah again? To make sure he's still okay? Maybe this weekend. Grace is moving into her new apartment tonight. She'll need time to settle in. Emma absorbed this, syrup-covered fork pausing midair. Is she going to work for you? Like actually work, or just pretend work because you feel bad for her? The question was direct, cutting through adult euphemism to core issue with the clarity children deployed when they hadn't learned to soften truth. Actually work. She's talented. She went to art school before Noah was born. I'm hiring her because we need someone with her skills. But you're also helping her because she needs help. Yes, and that's okay? Doing both things at once? Jonathan set down his burger, giving Emma his full attention, because this conversation mattered more than he'd initially realized. It's not just okay, it's the right way to help. Give people opportunity to succeed on their own terms instead of making them depend on handouts. Grace gets to work and earn money and build a career. We get talented designer. Everyone wins. What about Mr. Blackwood? He's going to be mad about this. The observation proved Emma had been paying more attention to adult conversations than Jonathan had realized, her awareness extending beyond school playground to corporate maneuvering that should be invisible to 7-year-olds. Probably, but Mr. Blackwood being mad doesn't make helping Grace wrong. Sometimes doing the right thing costs something. Emma considered this while finishing her pancakes. her silence the kind that meant she was processing rather than accepting. Mommy used to say the hardest part about being a grown-up is choosing between what's easy and what's right. She said you'd always choose right, even when it was hard. Is that still true? The question hit like a physical blow. Rebecca's faith in him delivered through their daughter's memory, asking whether 3 years of choosing corporate success over human connection had changed his fundamental character. I'm trying to make it true again, baby girl. That's the best I can do. The apartment Jonathan had arranged for Grace occupied the 3rd floor of a building Sinclair Hotels owned in Brooklyn Heights. Not quite brownstone territory, but respectable enough to avoid the stigma of obvious charity housing. 2 bedrooms, updated kitchen, windows that actually opened to let in air rather than sealed shut against urban noise. The furniture was standard corporate rental package, functional without personality, but clean and complete, ready for immediate occupancy. Grace stood in the center of the living room holding Noah while a social worker from Mount Sinai completed discharge paperwork, her expression mixing disbelief with suspicion that this couldn't be real. She'd changed into clothes that actually fit, items pulled from the emergency assistance fund Jonathan had quietly doubled that morning. Her hair clean and pulled back to reveal features that were striking despite exhaustion and malnutrition. The lease is month to month through your employment contract. Utilities are covered, internet is active, building has laundry in the basement. Any maintenance issues, call the property management number on the fridge. Jonathan kept his tone professional, property manager briefing tenant rather than CEO bestowing favor. Your security deposit is covered by HR as part of the benefits package. The social worker finished her paperwork, provided Grace with follow-up appointments for Noah's pediatric care, then left them alone in an apartment that felt too nice to be real. Grace moved through the rooms like someone expecting them to disappear if she looked too closely, her hand trailing across countertops and door frames as if confirming their solidity. This is really mine? For a whole year? As long as you maintain employment, yes. After a year, if you want to stay, we can discuss rent at market rate or help you find something else. Jonathan stayed near the door, maintaining distance that felt important for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. You start orientation Monday. Childcare facility is on the ground floor of our flagship hotel. I'll have someone meet you there at 8:30 to get Noah settled before your 9 a.m. start time. Grace turned to face him, Noah sleeping against her shoulder in the particular boneless way infants managed. I don't understand why you're doing this. The hospital bills, fine, you're rich, it's tax deductible, it makes you feel good. But this? An apartment and a job and childcare? This is more than charity. So what do you want? The accusation underneath the question was clear. Every terrible man she'd ever encountered, teaching her that generosity came with price tags that weren't immediately visible. Jonathan met her eyes, letting her see whatever she needed to see to trust or not trust based on her own assessment. I want you to succeed. I want Noah to grow up with a mother who has stability and purpose instead of just survival. I want to believe that having resources means I can actually help people instead of just attending charity galas and writing checks that make me feel better without changing anything. He pulled out his phone, opened the photo Emma had texted earlier, her detention slip alongside a defiant selfie. My daughter punched another kid today for saying homeless people are lazy. She's 7 years old and already has stronger moral clarity than most adults I know. I'm trying to be someone she doesn't grow up ashamed of. Grace studied him for a long moment, her expression shifting through suspicion toward something approaching cautious acceptance. I'm going to be terrible at this. I haven't done design work in 18 months. I'm out of practice, out of touch with current trends. Your expensive executives are going to hate having some charity case junior designer forced on them. Then get back in practice. Study current trends. Prove the expensive executives wrong. Jonathan moved toward the door, sensing this conversation had reached its natural endpoint. Orientation Monday, 9 a.m. Don't be late. He left before she could construct further objections, before his own doubts about whether this was genuine help or elaborate self-deception could undermine the commitment he'd made. The board meeting tomorrow would determine whether this moment of clarity cost him everything he'd built over 20 years. Whether choosing right over easy meant losing the company that bore his name. The evening passed in preparation for battle, Jonathan reviewing financials that proved Sinclair's strength despite Derek's insinuations, preparing talking points about sustainable growth and long-term vision, constructing arguments that his personal choices didn't affect professional capability. Emma did homework at the kitchen table while he worked, her presence grounding him in what actually mattered versus what corporate politics demanded. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" She didn't look up from her math worksheet, her question casual despite its weight. "A little. Mommy used to say being nervous means you care about the outcome, that it's better than not caring." Emma's pencil scratched across paper, solving problems with the methodical focus she'd inherited from Rebecca. She also said that people who try to make you choose between being good and being successful are people you shouldn't work with anyway. Your mother had strong opinions about a lot of things. She was usually right, though. Emma looked up then, her eyes holding certainty that made Jonathan's throat tight. "You're going to be okay tomorrow, because even if they fire you or whatever, you did the right thing. And that's what matters, right?" "Right." Jonathan said it with more confidence than he felt, let his daughter's faith substitute for his own wavering certainty about whether principles were worth the professional cost. Sleep came fitfully, Jonathan's mind cycling through board meeting scenarios and Derek's likely attacks and the delicate balance between defending his choices and appearing defensive. He woke at 5 to emails from 3 board members expressing concern about tomorrow's discussion, coded language that meant Derek had been working phones overnight to build coalition. The Sinclair Hotel's headquarters occupied 40 floors of a building in Midtown, glass and steel monument to corporate success that Jonathan had helped design 15 years ago when expansion seemed like destiny rather than burden. He arrived early, before most employees, the elevator carrying him to the executive floor in silence that felt like countdown to execution. Derek was already in the boardroom when Jonathan arrived, coffee in hand, positioned at the table's head despite not being CEO, the physical presumption of authority he'd been building toward for 3 years. 5 other board members had arrived early, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to hostile, the kind of pre-meeting alignment that meant votes had been decided before discussion started. "Jonathan, glad you could make it." Derek's tone carried false warmth that fooled exactly no one. "We have concerns we'd like to address before the full board convenes. Friendly conversation, nothing formal." "I prefer formal conversations. They create records." Jonathan took his seat at the opposite end of the table, refusing to cede spatial authority even as numerical odds turned against him. "Say what you came to say, Derek." The friendly pretense evaporated, Derek's expression hardening into something like satisfaction at dropping the mask. "The board has lost confidence in your ability to lead during critical expansion phases. Your judgment has been compromised by personal issues, grief, guilt, whatever psychological crisis you're experiencing. The Tokyo deal is stalling because investors question our stability. The sustainable luxury campaign you've championed is bleeding money with no clear ROI. And now you're hiring homeless women to positions they're unqualified for because, what? It makes you feel better about your dead wife and son?" The casual weaponizing of Jonathan's trauma, the reduction of Grace's talent to charity case, the implication that leadership required emotional lobotomy, it crystallized 3 years of resentment into sharp focus. Grace Miller was top 10% of her class at Parsons before circumstances forced her to withdraw. She has commercial instinct we need, and talent you couldn't recognize if it came with quarterly projections. I hired her because she's qualified, not because she's homeless. The fact that helping her also happens to be the right thing to do doesn't negate her professional value. The right thing. Derek's laugh was sharp, dismissive. You've spent 3 years building this company into a position where we can dominate luxury hospitality markets globally. Now you're jeopardizing that because you can't separate personal feelings from business decisions. The board needs a CEO who's focused on winning, not on saving homeless people to assuage guilty conscience about being rich while others suffer. The other board members watched the exchange like tennis spectators, heads turning between Derek's attacks and Jonathan's defense, their silence speaking to predetermined positions. Jonathan recognized the setup. Derek had spent weeks building this coalition, promising them stability and focus and freedom from CEO who insisted on treating employees like humans rather than resources. If winning requires treating people as expendable, I don't want it. Jonathan's words came out quieter than Derek's aggressive assault, but they carried weight that shifted the room's energy. Rebecca died believing I'd build something that mattered beyond profit margins. I spent 3 years forgetting that, treating relationships as transactions and measuring success in dollars rather than lives improved. If that's what being CEO requires, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not fit for the position anymore. The admission landed like detonation, board members exchanging glances that suggested this wasn't the defense they'd expected. Derek's expression showed surprise mixed with triumph, scenting blood in water and moving to finish what he'd started. Then perhaps it's time to discuss transition planning. Someone who can provide the focused leadership Sinclair needs during this pivotal. The boardroom door opened, cutting off Derek's victory speech. Emma stood in the doorway in her school uniform, Sarah Porter behind her, looking apologetic and defiant in equal measure. Every head turned toward this 7-year-old, interrupting corporate warfare with a kind of timing that suggested she'd been waiting for the right moment. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to talk to my daddy. Emma's voice was steady, despite the room full of powerful adults staring at her. It's important. More important than whatever you're discussing. Jonathan felt something crack in his chest. This child, who'd punched another kid for defending homeless people, now walking into corporate lion's den to defend him. Emma, this really isn't. Mommy's tree fell down. Her eyes held his, willing him to understand the message underneath the words. The oak tree in our backyard where you carved her initials. The storm last night knocked it over. Sarah says we need to decide what to do with it before they haul it away. The lie was transparent. There had been no storm last night, the oak tree was fine, but the metaphor was clear enough that even Derek couldn't miss it. The thing carrying Rebecca's memory was falling, and Jonathan had to choose whether to save it or let it be hauled away as dead wood, cluttering his carefully manicured corporate life. Excuse me. Jonathan stood, his decision crystallizing with the clarity that came from his daughter's willingness to lie to save him from himself. We'll continue this discussion another time. Right now, I have family business that takes precedence. Derek's face showed fury barely contained, the setup he'd constructed imploding because a 7-year-old girl had better tactical instincts than a room full of executives. We're in the middle of a board meeting, Jonathan. You can't just walk out. I absolutely can. Family emergency. We'll reschedule. Jonathan moved toward Emma, ignoring the spluttering protests from board members who'd gathered specifically for this confrontation. Sarah, please arrange a car. We have a tree to save. They left the boardroom in silence that felt like victory. The elevator ride down happening without words because Emma's grip on his hand said everything that needed saying. Only when they reached the lobby did Jonathan crouch to his daughter's level, looking into eyes that held Rebecca's wisdom and his own stubborn determination. There is no tree, is there? The tree's fine. But you weren't. Emma's chin lifted in the way that meant she'd thought this through and arrived at conclusions she wouldn't be moved from. Sarah called me during lunch, said you were in trouble and needed rescuing. So I rescued you. By lying to a room full of board members about a fallen tree. By reminding you that some things matter more than boards and money and Mr. Blackwood being mean. Her hands found his face, small palms on his cheeks, forcing attention. Mommy wouldn't want you to stop helping people just because other people think it's distracting. She'd want you to keep being good, even if it costs you the company. Right? Right. Jonathan pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than professional composure should allow. This child who understood what mattered better than he did after 3 years of forgetting. You're braver than I deserve, baby girl. I know. That's why I had to rescue you. Someone has to make sure you don't become the kind of person who forgets why he started helping Grace in the first place. They drove home in afternoon light that turned Manhattan gold. Jonathan's phone buzzing with calls he ignored because Emma was right. Some things mattered more than corporate crisis management. The penthouse felt different when they arrived. Less like monument to success and more like the home it had been when Rebecca was alive, when family meant more than square footage and imported marble. Sarah Porter had dinner ready despite the irregular schedule, her efficiency extending to anticipating needs before they were voiced. Miss Emma did well today. Very convincing performance with the tree story. You put her up to that. I reminded her that sometimes grown men need saving from their own worst instincts. She supplied the creativity. Sarah set plates on the table with the comfortable authority of someone who'd been part of this family longer than Jonathan had. Miss Rebecca would have done the same thing. Walked right into that boardroom and reminded you what actually matters. Rebecca would have handled it with more subtlety. Miss Rebecca would have set fire to Mr. Blackwood's expensive suit and dared him to call security. Sarah's smile carried memory of the woman who'd been equal parts grace and fury. You're thinking too much about what you might lose. Start thinking about what you'd lose by staying in a position that requires you to stop being the man she believed you could be. The observation settled into Jonathan's chest with uncomfortable accuracy. Rebecca's ghost speaking through the people who'd loved her, reminding him that success measured in dollars meant nothing if it cost his humanity. He'd spent 3 years building walls against feeling because feeling hurt too much, treating corporate achievement as substitute for actual healing. Grace Miller had cracked those walls with her desperate pride and Noah's near death, and the simple truth that some problems required engagement rather than checkbook solution. Emma had finished demolishing them by punching a kid for speaking truth about how privileged people viewed the poor, then walking into the boardroom to rescue him from selling his soul for corporate stability. His phone buzzed, message from Grace, tentative despite accepting the job. Thank you doesn't cover this for the apartment and the job and believing I was worth the risk. I'll prove you right. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I promise. Jonathan typed response that felt inadequate to the moment. You don't need to prove anything to me. Just show up Monday ready to work. The rest will follow. But even as he sent it, he knew the truth was more complicated. Grace did need to prove something, not to him, but to herself, that she was more than circumstances, more than the homeless girl with a baby who'd nearly frozen to death. That accepting help didn't make her weak. It made her smart enough to recognize opportunity. And Jonathan needed to prove something too, that he could build success without sacrificing decency. That 3 years of emotional shutdown hadn't permanently transformed him into the kind of man Derek Blackwood represented. That Rebecca's death hadn't killed the person she'd believed he could become. Tomorrow he'd deal with Derek's coup attempt, with board members who wanted focused leadership untainted by messy human compassion. Tomorrow he'd face consequences of choosing right over easy, principle over profit. Tomorrow, the corporate war would resume with higher stakes and clearer battle lines. But tonight, he sat at dinner with his daughter and the woman who'd helped raise his wife, eating simple food and talking about Emma's detention and the homework she needed to finish and whether they should get a dog because Mrs. Chen's puppy was really cute and Emma promised she'd take care of it. Tonight, he was just Jonathan Hayes, father, widower, man trying to figure out how to be good in a world that rewarded ruthlessness. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The Rebecca Hayes Foundation occupied a converted warehouse in Red Hook 6 months after Derek Blackwood's attempted coup collapsed under the weight of his own overreach. Jonathan stood at the entrance, watching the final construction crew install signage that caught morning light and transformed simple letters into promise, the kind of tangible optimism he'd forgotten existed during 3 years of existing rather than living. Grace Miller worked at a drafting table near the windows, her designs for the foundation's first promotional campaign spread across the surface in organized chaos that spoke to creative process refined through 6 months of proving she belonged. Noah sat in a playpen nearby, 18 months old now, and testing the boundaries of vertical mobility by pulling himself up on mesh sides with determined persistence. The space had transformed from industrial shell into functional learning center through collaboration between Jonathan's resources and Grace's vision. Her understanding of how design could communicate dignity rather than pity, reshaping his initial conception of charity into something approaching actual empowerment. 20 single parents would begin training here next week. Plumbing, electrical work, HVAC repair. Skills that translated directly into employment rather than dependence. Emma appeared from the back room where childcare facilities were being finalized, her 8 years showing in height gained and vocabulary expanded. Her assessment of the space carrying the particular authority she developed through watching adults build something that mattered. The toy selection is good, but we need more books. Little kids need stories, not just plastic things that make noise. Grace glanced up from her work, smiled with the easy familiarity that had developed through months of professional collaboration that sometimes felt like more. You're absolutely right. Can you make a list of what we should order? Already did. I put it on your desk with the budget calculation. Emma delivered this with the matter-of-fact competence that made Jonathan simultaneously proud and concerned about her childhood being consumed by adult responsibilities. Also, Miss Porter says lunch is ready if people want to stop working long enough to eat. The board meeting that should have ended Jonathan's tenure as CEO had instead ended Derek Blackwood's 20-year association with Sinclair Hotels, the older man's overconfidence leading him to demand immediate vote of no confidence without securing necessary support. 7 board members had sided with Jonathan, 5 with Derek, the margin narrow enough to be terrifying, but sufficient to survive. Derek had resigned the next day with threats of litigation that never materialized, accepting golden parachute that bought silence, if not actual peace. Tokyo deal had closed 2 months later on terms favorable to Sinclair. Investors impressed by CEO who prioritized principles over profit margins, the kind of long-term thinking that built sustainable success rather than quarterly gains. The sustainable luxury campaign Grace had helped design was performing beyond projections, her commercial instincts proving exactly as strong as her Parsons professors had predicted. But success came with complications Jonathan was still learning to navigate. Grace's employment had evolved from desperate gratitude into genuine competence, her work earning promotion to creative director within 4 months, her salary tripling to reflect market value rather than charitable impulse. The apartment had transitioned from temporary housing to home she could afford on her own salary. The shift from dependence to independence, creating distance that felt both necessary and painful. You're doing the jaw thing. Grace's observation cut through his contemplation. Her awareness of his tells developed through proximity and attention. Board meeting anxiety or something else? Patricia Morrison is coming by this afternoon. Derek's daughter. She wants to talk about the foundation. Grace's expression shifted, recognition of the name carrying weight. The one who testified against her own father? She helped build the case that got him barred from serving on corporate boards. Now she's looking for work that matters instead of just pays. Thought she might want to help with partnerships and expansion planning. Hiring your enemy's daughter seems either very forgiving or very strategic. Grace returned attention to her designs, but her tone carried the edge that appeared when she suspected Jonathan of maneuvering rather than straightforward action. Which is it? Both. Patricia's brilliant and motivated and trying to build identity separate from her father's corruption. We need someone who understands corporate partnerships but cares about actual outcomes. She fits. Jonathan moved closer to examine the promotional materials, giving himself excuse to stand near her without making the proximity obvious. Unless you think it's a bad idea. I think you collect broken people and give them purpose. Patricia fits the pattern. Grace's pencil moved across paper with confident strokes, blocking out composition that would become final design. I'm Exhibit A for that particular character flaw. The comment landed with barbs underneath, their relationship existing in complicated territory between professional collaboration and something neither had named, despite Emma's not subtle observations about how Grace made him do the less sad face. 6 months of careful distance, of maintaining appropriate boundaries, of pretending proximity didn't generate pull that felt dangerous to acknowledge. You're Exhibit A for talent meeting opportunity. The brokenness was circumstantial, not definitional. Jonathan's hands found the table edge, gripping hard enough that knuckles showed white. You've proven that every day for 6 months. Have I? Grace set down her pencil, finally meeting his eyes with directness that made breathing difficult. Or am I still the charity case you rescued who happens to be good at design? Because I can't tell anymore, Jonathan. I don't know if you see Grace Miller, creative director, or Grace Miller, homeless girl you saved who's doing surprisingly well for someone who started on a frozen bench. The accusation cut deeper than it should, because it touched the question Jonathan had been avoiding, whether helping Grace had been about her potential or his need to save someone after failing to save his son. Whether their professional relationship had become personal because of genuine connection or because he'd invested too much to walk away without return on emotional capital. I see both. The woman you were gave you perspective most designers lack. The woman you've become gives us creative vision we couldn't buy from traditional hires. They're not separate things, Grace. They're what makes you valuable beyond just skill set. That's a corporate answer. Very CEO, very polished. Grace stood, closing distance between them until Jonathan could see the gold flecks in her eyes that he'd cataloged over months of trying not to notice details that felt too intimate for professional relationship. What's the human answer? When you look at me, what do you actually see? The question hung in converted warehouse that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Emma's voice audible from the back room as she discussed book selections with Mrs. Porter. Noah's babbling providing soundtrack to moment that felt like precipice. Jonathan could either retreat from or step toward with consequences he couldn't predict. I see someone who reminds me what bravery actually means. Not the corporate courage of standing up to board members, but the human courage of accepting help when pride says you shouldn't. Of trusting that opportunity isn't manipulation, of showing up every day and proving you belong, instead of waiting for someone to discover you don't. His hands found her shoulders, contact that crossed professional lines they'd maintained for 6 months. I see the woman who made me remember that being alive means more than just surviving. And that terrifies me, Grace. Because the last person who made me feel human died in my arms. And I don't know if I can survive losing that again. Grace's expression shifted through surprise toward something that looked like relief mixed with frustration. You're not the only one who's terrified. You're Jonathan Hayes. $3 billion, hotels in 12 countries, board meetings and investor calls and charity galas. I'm 20 years old with a baby and 6 months of actual employment history. This? She gestured between them, acknowledging the unnamed thing they'd been dancing around. This doesn't make sense on any rational level. I've spent 3 years making rational decisions. They built shareholder value and cost me everything that mattered. Maybe it's time to make an irrational decision and see what happens. The kiss happened before either could construct further barriers, his hands pulling her close while hers fisted in his shirt. 6 months of careful distance collapsing into contact that felt like coming home after extended exile. She tasted like the coffee she'd been drinking, her body fitting against his with the particular rightness that suggested this had been inevitable, despite their best efforts at denial. Emma's voice cut through before the moment could deepen beyond recovery. I knew it. Mrs. Porter, I told you they were going to kiss eventually. You owe me $5. They broke apart, Jonathan's face heating with embarrassment that felt ridiculous for a man in his late 30s. Emma stood in the doorway looking triumphant. Sarah Porter behind her trying to maintain disapproving expression while clearly suppressing smile. Miss Emma, we don't make bets about your father's personal life. Sarah's tone carried no actual censure, her investment in this relationship predating its existence by months of knowing looks and pointed comments about how Grace was good for him. But I was right. That means I win. Emma approached with the confidence of someone who'd just had her assessment of reality confirmed. Are you dating now? Because if you are, you should tell Grace about how you talk about her during breakfast when you think I'm not listening. Jonathan felt exposure of being caught by his daughter, the particular vulnerability of having private observations made public. Emma, that's enough. He says you make him want to be less sad, that watching you work reminds him that creating something beautiful matters more than just making money. Also, that your smile makes his stomach do weird things, but he's too scared to do anything about it, because what if you don't feel the same way, and then work gets awkward? Emma delivered this intelligence with the precision of someone who'd been taking notes.
I think you should date him because he's really nice when he's not being CEO, and you make him laugh, which barely anyone does anymore.
Grace's expression showed amusement fighting past mortification, her hand rising to cover her mouth, as if that could contain the laugh that escaped. Your daughter is terrifyingly observant. Rebecca's genetics. She used to say Emma could read emotional subtext before she could read actual text. Jonathan pulled his daughter close, despite her having just violated every privacy boundary he possessed. Also, she's grounded for eavesdropping and making bets about my personal life. Worth it. Emma showed zero remorse, her satisfaction at being proven correct outweighing punishment threat. You needed pushing. You were never going to just tell her you liked her. You'd have waited another 6 months doing the jaw thing and making sad eyes whenever she left the room. The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Jonathan's caution, born from 3 years of avoiding emotional risk, manifesting as endless delay in acknowledging feelings that had been obvious to everyone except possibly Grace herself. He'd been waiting for perfect moment, for certainty that couldn't exist, for guarantee that opening himself to connection wouldn't result in the same devastating loss he'd experienced with Rebecca. Well, now that Emma has eliminated any possibility of subtlety or mystery, I should probably ask, do you want to have dinner with me? Actual dinner, not working lunch or foundation planning session. Just two people figuring out if this, he gestured between them, mirroring her earlier acknowledgement of the undefined thing. If this is something we want to pursue. Despite all the rational reasons, it's complicated. Grace took her time answering, her eyes searching his face for something he hoped she found. I have conditions. Name them. We keep work separate from personal. I need to know my job is based on competence, not relationship status. If this doesn't work out, I don't lose my career along with whatever we were building. Her voice was steady but carried weight of someone who'd lost too much, too quickly. And we go slow. No rushing into anything because Emma's invested or because you're making up for lost time. We figure this out at whatever pace makes sense for us, not for anyone else's timeline. Agreed. Slow. Professional boundaries maintained. No pressure from 8-year-old relationship consultants. Jonathan glanced at Emma, who looked delighted despite the boundary setting. Saturday night? There's a restaurant in Soho that serves actual food instead of architectural plating and pretentious descriptions. Saturday works, but you should know, I've never actually been on a real date. The father of my child was more interested in not being a father than in dinner conversation. So if I'm terrible at this, it's because I have no experience, not because I'm not interested. The admission revealed vulnerability Grace rarely showed. The confident creative director giving way to 20-year-old who'd been abandoned by everyone except the stranger who'd stopped at a bus bench 6 months ago. Then we'll both figure it out together. I've been on exactly 0 dates since Rebecca died, so we're equally unprepared. Patricia Morrison arrived that afternoon with the particular determination of someone who'd burned bridges and was now committed to building new ones from ash and determination. 26 years old, dressed in clothes that suggested she'd downgraded from corporate armor to non-profit practical, carrying portfolio of partnership proposals she'd developed in the 3 months since testifying against her father. Mr. Hayes, thank you for seeing me. Her handshake was firm, professional, eyes meeting his without the shame that might have accompanied appearing before the man her father had tried to destroy. I know this is unconventional, but I've spent 6 months watching what you're building here, and I want to be part of it. They settled in Jonathan's makeshift office, really just a corner of the warehouse with a desk and chairs, the foundation still too new for actual administrative infrastructure. Patricia laid out her proposals with practiced efficiency. Partnerships with community colleges, corporate sponsorships that didn't compromise mission, expansion models that could replicate in other cities without losing integrity. Your father would hate everything about this plan. Jonathan's observation wasn't accusation, just recognition of how thoroughly Patricia had rejected the values Derek represented. My father spent 20 years treating people as resources to exploit. I spent my childhood watching him destroy lives for profit margins. Patricia's composure cracked slightly, pain breaking through professional presentation. Helping you build something that actually empowers people instead of using them feels like the best possible repudiation of everything he taught me. You understand that some people will see this as betrayal. Working with the man who helped end your father's career.
Some people already see me as the daughter who destroyed her own father. Adding your employment to the list of grievances doesn't make it substantially worse. She met his eyes with directness that reminded Jonathan of Emma's unflinching honesty. I'm not looking for redemption or forgiveness. I'm looking for work that matters.
If you can use what I'm offering, I'm available. If not, I'll find somewhere else that aligns with what I'm trying to build for myself. Jonathan reviewed the proposals, seeing in Patricia's strategic thinking the same analytical capability her father had possessed, now redirected toward construction rather than destruction. Grace Miller is our creative director. She'd be your direct supervisor for any partnership materials and public-facing communications. That dynamic work for you? The homeless woman you hired? I've seen her work. It's exceptional. Patricia showed no judgment in the assessment, just professional recognition of competence. If she can tolerate working with Derek Blackwood's daughter, I can absolutely report to her. She might be more than creative director soon. Jonathan paused, unsure how to classify a relationship that had been officially acknowledged for approximately 3 hours. We're figuring out if there's something personal alongside the professional. Patricia's expression showed approval underneath the neutral professionalism. Then I especially need to prove I'm here for the work, not because of family drama or corporate maneuvering. Harder to do if people think I'm connected to you personally through Grace. Everything about this foundation is complicated. Adding you to the mix doesn't make it substantially more difficult. Jonathan extended his hand, the gesture of agreement carrying weight beyond simple employment. Welcome to the team. You start Monday, same time as our first cohort of students. Baptism by fire. The weekend passed in preparation for two beginnings, the foundation's official launch and Jonathan's first actual date in 4 years. Saturday evening found him standing in front of his closet, trying to determine what one wore at a casual dinner with someone he'd been professionally adjacent to for 6 months, his uncertainty prompting Emma to appear in his doorway with the exasperated expression of someone dealing with incompetent adult. You're overthinking this. Wear the dark jeans and the blue shirt that makes your eyes less tired looking. She settled on his bed with the authority of someone whose opinion would be heard regardless of his preference. And don't talk about work the whole time. Grace already knows you're good at business. She needs to know you're good at being human too. When did you become an expert on dating? When I started paying attention to how sad you've been since Mommy died. Grace makes you less sad. I want you to not mess it up by being weird about money or acting like she should be grateful you hired her. Emma's directness carried Rebecca's DNA, the particular gift for seeing through social nicety to uncomfortable truth. Just be daddy, not CEO, not foundation founder, just the person who reads me bedtime stories and makes terrible pancakes on Sunday and cries during sad movies when you think I'm not looking. The observation landed with the weight of recognition that his daughter saw him more clearly than he saw himself. All the performance of competent leadership stripped away to reveal the human underneath. I don't know how to do this, baby girl. I don't know how to be the person who dates and risks and potentially loses again. You do it the way you did helping Grace in the first place. You see someone who needs something, and you decide if giving it to them is worth the risk. Except this time, what you're giving is yourself. And what you might get back is being happy again, instead of just being rich and functional. Emma crossed to him, her 8-year-old wisdom somehow containing multitudes. Mommy wouldn't want you to be alone forever. She'd want you to find someone who makes you laugh and argues with you about stuff, and loves me because I'm part of you. Grace does all those things. So stop being scared and just see what happens. The restaurant was everything Jonathan had promised. Casual, excellent food, no pretension about presentation or pedigree. Grace arrived wearing a dress he'd never seen her in, her hair down instead of pulled back for work. The transformation from creative director to woman on a date, subtle but significant. They navigated awkward greeting and initial ordering, the professional ease they'd developed not quite translating to personal interaction. This is weird. Grace's observation broke the tension, her characteristic directness cutting through performative comfort. We've been working together for 6 months. I know how you take your coffee and that you do this thing with your jaw when you're stressed. But I don't know your favorite color, or whether you prefer mountains or beaches, or if you're one of those people who thinks pineapple belongs on pizza. Blue. Mountains. And pineapple on pizza is an abomination that should be illegal. Jonathan felt himself relax into honesty, letting go of the careful management that characterized his usual interactions. What about you? What do I not know about Grace Miller, beyond her exceptional design skills and stubborn independence? I wanted to be a children's book illustrator before Noah. Thought I'd create stories that helped kids feel less alone, particularly kids whose lives didn't match the happy family narratives most books showed. She traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass, the gesture revealing nervousness that didn't show in her voice. I read to Noah every night from books I bought at thrift stores because I want him to grow up loving stories, even if we can't afford the fancy editions. Emma does the same thing. Rebecca started her on books before she could actually comprehend the words, said the rhythm of reading together mattered more than comprehension. The mention of his late wife created brief silence, acknowledging the ghost that would always exist between them. Does it bother you? That I was married before? That Emma's not your child? That Rebecca will always be part of our history? Grace considered the question with visible seriousness, her response carrying weight of someone who'd thought this through. It would bother me more if you pretended she didn't exist, or tried to erase her from your life. Emma deserves to remember her mother. You deserve to honor what you had. I'm not looking to replace Rebecca. I'm looking to see if there's space for something new alongside what came before. The answer revealed understanding that felt impossibly mature for someone who'd just turned 21 the month before, her youth somehow containing wisdom that came from surviving loss and hardship that most people twice her age never experienced. The dinner progressed into easier territory, conversation flowing between childhood memories and present aspirations, the foundation launch and Emma's latest school project. The careful construction of shared knowledge that transformed colleagues into something approaching partnership. They walked through Soho after dinner, the spring evening mild enough for extended wandering, their hands finding each other with the tentative exploration of people navigating new territory. Grace stopped at a bookstore window, her attention caught by children's books displayed with the kind of longing that suggested this represented dreams deferred rather than abandoned. You should go back to school. Finish your degree. Jonathan's suggestion was gentle, not directive, offering possibility rather than instruction. The foundation could use someone who understands visual storytelling for children. We're going to need materials that communicate to kids what their parents are building. I can't afford Parsons' tuition, even with salary increase. Sinclair Hotels has educational assistance program, covers up to $30,000 annually for employees pursuing degrees relevant to their work. You'd qualify. He pulled her closer, the contact feeling natural despite its newness. Not because I'm trying to save you or fix you, because you have talent that deserves development and ambitions that matter. Because Noah should grow up seeing his mother achieve her dreams, instead of just surviving. Grace leaned into him, her head finding his shoulder with the kind of trust that felt like a gift. You realize that if this doesn't work out, if we try dating and it falls apart, it's going to be spectacularly awkward at work. Then we make sure it works out. Or we're adults about it if things end, and maintain professional boundaries that let us keep building something that matters. Jonathan pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing in the scent that had become familiar through proximity. I'm not saying this will be easy, Grace. I'm saying it might be worth trying anyway. The foundation's opening ceremony happened on a Monday that felt like dawn after extended darkness. 20 students gathering in the warehouse that had transformed into learning center through months of collective effort. Jonathan stood at a podium, feeling exposure that came from making principles public, the kind of vulnerability that Derek Blackwood would have exploited, but that felt necessary anyway. 6 months ago, I met a woman and her baby freezing to death on a bus bench while the richest city in the world walked past. That night changed my understanding of what wealth actually means, what responsibility looks like, what it means to help versus just making myself feel better about having resources while others suffer. He found Grace in the crowd, her expression showing support and something warmer. This foundation exists because that woman taught me that opportunity matters more than charity. That treating people with dignity means giving them tools to succeed on their own terms, instead of making them dependent on handouts. He detailed the curriculum, the employment partnerships, the child care that let parents learn without abandoning their children, the housing assistance that didn't require choosing between rent and food. Patricia Morrison stood beside Grace, both women representing the foundation's core principle, that circumstances didn't define potential, that everyone deserved a chance to prove what they could become given actual support. We're calling this the Rebecca Hayes Foundation because my late wife believed that being human meant helping people when they needed it, without judgment or conditions or expectation of return. She died believing I'd build something that mattered beyond quarterly earnings. It took me 3 years and a freezing baby to remember that promise. Jonathan's voice roughened despite his attempt at composure. We won't save everyone. We won't fix systemic poverty with a single warehouse in Brooklyn. But we can give 20 people tools to build better lives, and then 20 more. And eventually, maybe we create enough opportunity that freezing on benches becomes rare enough to shock us again, instead of being invisible suffering we walk past every day. Emma started the applause, her 8-year-old hands clapping with the fierce pride that made Jonathan's throat tight. The students joined, then staff, then Grace and Patricia, the sound filling the warehouse with a kind of hope that actually translated into action rather than just sentiment. The following months established rhythm of building something larger than individual need. Students progressed through training, some excelling, others struggling, all receiving support that honored their effort regardless of outcome. Grace's designs attracted attention from other nonprofits, her work demonstrating that empowerment messaging could be beautiful instead of condescending. Patricia's partnership strategy brought corporate sponsorships that funded expansion without compromising mission. Jonathan's relationship with Grace deepened through careful navigation of personal and professional boundaries. Their time together split between foundation work and actual dates, learning each other through both collaboration and courtship. Emma approved with the particular satisfaction of someone whose matchmaking had succeeded, her comfort with Grace evolving from acceptance to genuine affection that made family dinners feel complete for the first time in years. But success brought visibility that attracted attention Jonathan hadn't anticipated. Tyler Morrison appeared at the foundation 3 months after opening, his presence announced by security who'd been briefed on potential threats. 29 years old, just released from an 8-year sentence for assault, carrying legal documents that claimed parental rights to Noah despite having abandoned Grace when she was pregnant. Grace's face went white when security escorted Tyler into Jonathan's office, her hands trembling with the kind of fear that came from intimate knowledge of violence.
He can't be here. The restraining order
expired while I was inside. My lawyer says I got rights to my son. Joint custody at minimum, maybe full if the court decides you're unfit. Tyler's voice carried the particular arrogance of men who'd learned violence worked. Living in some billionaire's charity apartment, working at his foundation, dating the boss, doesn't look good for a custody hearing, Grace. Looks like you're selling yourself to keep a roof over the kid's head. Jonathan felt rage rise, the protective instinct that had driven him to help Grace 6 months ago, now sharpening into something more dangerous. You need to leave. Now. Before I call police and have you arrested for violating the harassment clause in the custody agreement. What custody agreement? I never signed away my rights. Never even got served papers because Grace was too chicken shit to file formal documentation. Tyler leaned back in his chair, enjoying their discomfort. My lawyer says we got a strong case. Absentee father trying to reconnect with his son versus homeless woman who's been couch surfing through charity relationships. Judge is going to love that narrative. Grace's breathing had gone shallow, panic attack building in the way Jonathan had learned to recognize through months of proximity. He moved to her side, his hand finding hers, grounding her through contact while his mind calculated options. You disappeared when she was pregnant.
provided no support, no contact, no indication you wanted parental involvement. That abandonment matters in custody determination. Prove it.
Show me the text messages, the emails, the documentation of me refusing to help. Oh wait, we were 20-year-old kids who broke up. There's no paper trail because I didn't know she was keeping it. Tyler's smile showed teeth. My word against hers about whether I knew she was pregnant when I left. And I'm the one who went to prison and got rehabilitated. She's the one who let our kid almost freeze to death on a park bench while billionaires walked past. The manipulation was transparent. The weaponizing of Jonathan's help turned into evidence of Grace's instability. But that didn't make it less dangerous. Family courts looked for stability, for traditional family structures, for evidence that children would thrive rather than just survive. Tyler could argue that Grace's relationship with Jonathan was transactional, that her housing and employment depended on maintaining romantic connection to her employer, that Noah deserved father figure who was actually committed rather than potentially temporary. Get out. Jonathan's voice was quiet, dangerous, the executive authority bleeding into personal threat. Leave this building. Don't contact Grace. Don't approach Noah. Don't send lawyers with custody threats. Because I promise you, Tyler, you don't want to fight me in court with the legal resources I can bring to bear. Threatening me? That'll look great when my lawyer presents it as evidence of you trying to buy my son. Tyler stood, his movement casual, despite the tension crackling through the room. See you at the hearing, Grace. Hope your billionaire boyfriend's money can buy you a better lawyer than it bought you respectability. He left before Jonathan could respond, the door closing on silence that felt like aftermath of explosion. Grace's breathing had accelerated into full panic attack, her hands clutching Jonathan's with desperate strength, while her chest heaved with the effort of getting air into lungs that had forgotten their function. Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Jonathan's voice was steady, the technique learned from Emma's pediatrician during asthma attacks that had required same controlled breathing. You're safe. Noah's safe. Tyler's gone, and he's not taking your son. He could. The words came out between gasps, terror making them almost incomprehensible. He's right about the optics. Single mother living in boss's charity apartment, dating employer, dependent on relationship for housing and job. The judge could decide Noah needs stable 2-parent home instead of whatever complicated situation I've built here. Then we change the optics. We build case that shows you're stable, employed, connected to community support that includes, but doesn't depend on me. Jonathan pulled her closer, his arms around her providing physical anchor against the panic. Tyler thinks money can't fight this. He's wrong. Money can hire the best family lawyers in New York. Money can document 6 months of you being exceptional parent while he was absent. Money can make sure judge sees reality instead of the narrative Tyler's constructing. Grace's breathing began to slow, panic attack easing through combination of controlled breathing and physical contact. I don't want to be the woman who needs rescuing again. I worked so hard to become someone who stands on her own. Standing on your own doesn't mean refusing help when you're attacked. It means Tyler's lawyer painted Grace as unstable, dependent, using relationship with Jonathan to maintain housing and employment. Jonathan's legal team countered with 6 months of documentation showing Grace's professional competence, her parenting dedication, the support system she'd built that included, but wasn't limited to, romantic connection. Emma became unexpected asset when the court-appointed evaluator interviewed her about household dynamics. Her 8-year-old honesty providing testimony that no amount of legal maneuvering could match. Grace is good for my dad and good for Noah. She doesn't try to replace my mom or act like she's trying to be perfect. She just shows up and helps and loves Noah and makes my dad smile. That's what makes her a good mom. She cares about what Noah needs instead of what looks good. The evaluator's report recommended primary custody remain with Grace, citing stable employment, supportive community, and child-centered parenting that prioritized Noah's well-being over adult conflict. Tyler's lawyer filed immediate appeal, dragging proceedings into additional months of uncertainty that wore Grace down despite Jonathan's best efforts at support. I'm exhausted. Her admission came late one night at his penthouse,
Noah asleep in Emma's old crib that Sarah Porter had retrieved from storage. Exhausted from fighting, from proving I deserve my son, from having every decision I've made for the past 2 years picked apart by lawyers looking for evidence of instability. Jonathan set aside the legal briefs he'd been reviewing, his attention shifting entirely to Grace's defeated posture.
What do you need? What would actually help instead of just being another thing to manage? I need Tyler to disappear back into whatever hole he crawled out of. I need judges to see that biology doesn't make someone a parent. I need...
She stopped, the want underneath too large to voice. I need to know that if this doesn't work between us, if we try building something and it falls apart, I don't lose everything again.
What if we removed that contingency? What if you had security that didn't depend on me? He pulled his phone, opened email he'd been drafting for the past week. Foundation is incorporating as independent nonprofit. I'm the founder, but governance transfers to board of directors that includes you, Patricia, and 3 external members. Your position and salary come from the foundation, not me personally. Same with housing, transferred from Sinclair Hotels to foundation as employee benefit. If we break up tomorrow, you keep job and apartment because they're yours through professional merit, not personal connection. Grace stared at the legal documents, her expression showing disbelief, fighting past exhaustion. You'd really give up control like that? Make the foundation actually independent instead of just your personal charity project? It was always supposed to be bigger than me. I just needed a push to make it real instead of theoretical. Jonathan set the phone down, giving her space to process without his proximity pressuring response.
This doesn't solve the custody battle or make Tyler disappear, but it removes the argument that you're dependent on our relationship for survival. Shows Judge that you've built career and stability that exists independent of who you're dating.
Why are you doing this? The question was raw, stripped of the careful neutrality they'd maintained through months of legal warfare. Really doing it, not the public answer or the strategic justification. Why are you willing to give up control and create independence that makes it easier for me to leave? Jonathan thought about that, about the real answer versus the safe one. Because I love you, not because you need me or because I saved you, or because it makes me feel good about being wealthy. Because you're brilliant and fierce, and you make me want to be better than I was. And love that depends on maintaining power and balance isn't love. It's ownership. I don't want to own you, Grace. I want to stand beside you while we build something neither of us could create alone. The declaration landed in his penthouse living room with the weight of truth spoken aloud for the first time, the careful dance they'd maintained giving way that felt dangerous and necessary. Grace's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall, her composure holding despite the emotion threatening to break through. I love you too. I've been terrified to say it because what if it's just gratitude, or trauma bonding, or Stockholm syndrome, where I fell for my rescuer? Her laugh was wet, shaky. But it's not. It's you reading to Noah in voices that make him giggle. It's you asking Emma's opinion on foundation decisions because you respect her judgment. It's you doing your jaw thing when you're stressed and trying to hide it. I love all of that. I love you, and I'm still terrified it's going to fall apart and destroy everything we've built. Then we keep building anyway. We take the risk despite the fear. We trust that what we're creating is strong enough to survive complications. Jonathan closed the distance between them, his hands finding her face with gentle certainty. I'm terrified too, Grace, but I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life safe and alone than I am of risking everything on the possibility that this might work. The kiss that followed was different from their first. Less tentative exploration, more deliberate claim. Grace's arms wrapped around him with strength that belied her smaller frame, her body fitting against his with a particular rightness that suggested they'd been built to connect this way. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, her smile showed relief and want in equal measure. So we're doing this? Really doing it, not just dating, but actually building towards something permanent? We're doing this.
Whatever this becomes, however long it takes to figure out. No timelines, no pressure, just seeing where this goes when we're honest about wanting it to go somewhere.
Jonathan rested his forehead against hers, breathing the same air, existing in the small space between separate and together. Emma's going to be insufferable about being right. Fair warning.
Emma can be as insufferable as she wants. She earned it.
Grace pulled back enough to meet his eyes, her expression holding certainty that had been absent during months of careful navigation.
Your daughter is terrifyingly wise. Takes after her mother.
The custody hearing happened on the Tuesday morning that felt like Judgment Day. The courtroom decorated an institutional neutrality that did nothing to calm Grace's visible anxiety. Tyler's lawyer presented their case with polished aggression, painting narrative of absent father seeking connection versus opportunistic mother using wealthy boyfriend to maintain lifestyle she couldn't afford independently. Jonathan's legal team countered with documentation that transformed narrative into facts. Grace's employment history, her professional achievements, her parenting dedication, the community support that included Jonathan but extended far beyond him. The Foundation's incorporation papers proved her position existed independent of personal relationship, her salary competitive with market rate for her experience level. Emma's testimony to the court evaluator was read into record, her 8-year-old perspective cutting through legal maneuvering to human truth underneath. Grace loves Noah, not because she has to or because someone pays her, because he's her son and she'd do anything to keep him safe. That's what makes her a good mom. Tyler wasn't there when Noah was freezing. He doesn't get to show up now and pretend he cares just because Grace has help. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years adjudicating family disputes, her expression revealing nothing as she reviewed documentation and testimony. Mr. Morrison, your assertion that you were unaware of the pregnancy doesn't align with the text message evidence, showing Mrs. Miller explicitly informing you of her condition and requesting your involvement. Your subsequent absence for 2 years demonstrates abandonment that California law recognizes as grounds for termination of parental rights. Tyler's lawyer attempted objection, but the judge's raised hand silenced protest before it could form. Ms. Miller has demonstrated stable employment, secure housing, and comprehensive support system. While her relationship with Mr. Hayes is recent, evidence shows her professional position and residential stability exist independent of that relationship. The court finds no reason to disturb primary custody. The ruling was comprehensive. Grace retained full legal and physical custody. Tyler received supervised visitation pending completion of parenting classes. The question of Noah's future settled in favor of the woman who'd kept him alive when the world offered nothing but cold benches and closed doors. Grace's relief manifested in tears she'd been holding for months, her body sagging against Jonathan's shoulder while the judge finalized paperwork. Tyler left the courtroom in silence, his lawyer's promises of appeal sounding hollow against the weight of documented abandonment and Grace's proved stability. "It's over," she spoke into Jonathan's shirt, her voice muffled but audible. "He can't take Noah. We're safe." You were always safe. The law just caught up with reality. Jonathan pressed a kiss to her hair, breathing her in, feeling the particular relief that came from crisis survived. You did this, Grace. Not me, not the lawyers, not the money. You proved you were the parent Noah needed. Everything else was just documentation of what was already true. The celebration happened at the penthouse that evening, Emma insisting on making cake herself despite dubious baking skills, Sarah Porter supervising to prevent complete disaster. Noah toddled between adults with the oblivious joy of 18-month-olds who had no idea the danger that had just passed, his laughter filling space that had been too quiet for too long. Patricia Morrison arrived with champagne and the particular satisfaction of someone who'd helped build the case that secured victory. "You should know, Tyler's lawyer reached out about settlement discussions. He's willing to terminate parental rights voluntarily in exchange for no child support claims and sealed records." Grace's expression showed disbelief. He'd really give up Noah completely? He never wanted a son. He wanted leverage and vindication for being abandoned. You took away both by proving you're better parent than he could ever be.
Patricia poured champagne with the ease of someone who'd navigated corporate events before, redirecting toward actual purpose. Take the deal.
Get him out of Noah's life permanently. Build your future without that threat hanging over everything you do. The papers were signed the following week. Tyler Morrison's parental rights formally terminated in exchange for sealed records and no financial obligation. Noah became Grace Miller's son legally and completely, the biology that had created threat, now irrelevant against the love and commitment that defined actual parenthood.
Spring turned to summer in the way New York seasons changed, sudden and complete. The Foundation's first cohort graduating with jobs secured and skills certified. Jonathan stood beside Grace during the ceremony, their hands linked with the casual intimacy of people who'd stopped questioning whether connection was real or just convenient. Emma sat in the front row with Noah, her 8-year-old supervision of the toddler demonstrating responsibility that made Jonathan simultaneously proud and concerned about her childhood being consumed by adult duties.
We should talk about next steps. Grace's voice was quiet, meant only for him despite the celebration surrounding them. About what this is becoming, where it's going. About whether we're building towards something permanent or just seeing how long the good feelings last.
Jonathan pulled her closer, his arm around her waist, creating claim that felt natural after months of earning the right to this proximity.
What do you want it to be?
I want to wake up next to you without wondering if this is the day you realize I'm too young, or too complicated, or too much work. I want Noah to grow up calling you Dad because you've earned it, not because I need father figure to complete the picture.
I want Emma to have siblings who are actually hers instead of half connections through marriages that might not last. Grace turned to face him fully, her expression holding vulnerability and strength in equal measure.
I want forever, Jonathan. But I need to know you want it too before I commit to building something that could destroy me if it falls apart.
The answer should have required thought, consideration, the careful analysis Jonathan applied to business decisions with billion-dollar implications. But this wasn't business. This was Grace asking whether he was brave enough to risk the kind of love that had already destroyed him once, whether Rebecca's death had permanently broken his capacity for commitment, or if healing was possible. I want to marry you when you're ready. Not because it solves custody problems or makes our situation more respectable. Because you're the first person since Rebecca who made me remember that being alive means more than just surviving. He found her hand, laced their fingers together with the deliberate intention of someone making choice rather than accepting circumstance. I want Emma to have siblings and Noah to have a father who shows up. I want to build something with you that honors Rebecca's memory while being entirely ours. And I'm terrified it might end the way everything else has ended. But I'd rather have that fear than the certainty of being safe and alone. Grace's smile broke through the careful control she'd maintained, transformation from guarded survival into actual joy, making her look younger than her 21 years. Then let's build it. Slow, messy, complicated. All of it. Let's see what happens when we're brave enough to risk everything on the possibility that love might work this time. They kissed in front of the graduating students and foundation staff, and Emma's delighted laughter, claiming each other publicly in a way that made retreat impossible. The future stretched ahead with all its uncertainty and potential, the foundation growing and their relationship deepening, and Noah learning words while Emma taught him how siblings should treat each other. 6 months after the custody victory, Jonathan proposed in the same warehouse where they'd built the foundation. Grace's hand in his, while Emma and Noah played nearby, and Sarah Porter pretended not to cry. The ring was simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious jewelry his wealth could have bought, chosen to reflect the woman Grace was, rather than the resources he possessed. Yes. She didn't need time to consider, didn't require romantic speech or perfect moment. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to building family, and yes to being terrified, and yes to trusting that this is real even when it doesn't make sense. The wedding happened a year later in the backyard of the Connecticut house Jonathan had bought specifically because it had space for the family they were becoming. Small ceremony, close friends, Emma as maid of honor and Noah as ring bearer, who mostly tried to eat the pillow. José's memory present in the oak tree where Jonathan had carved her initials years before. Grace's name added beneath with Emma's help. The symbol of love that expanded rather than replaced. Standing at the altar, watching Grace walk toward him in simple white dress, Jonathan felt the particular fullness that came from survival transforming into actual living. He'd spent 3 years being rich and sad, building corporate success on foundation of emotional shutdown. Grace had cracked that armor by needing help she couldn't accept, by proving that vulnerability was strength, and accepting support didn't mean surrendering independence. "You're doing the jaw thing." Her whispered observation as she reached him carried affection rather than concern, recognizing his tell without judgment. Occupational hazard of being terrified and happy at the same time. Good terrified or bad terrified? The kind that means I finally have something worth losing again. The kind that makes me brave enough to try anyway. They spoke vows that promised partnership rather than rescue, commitment that honored their complicated beginning, while building toward future neither could have imagined when Jonathan had stopped at a frozen bus bench 6 months before. Emma cried through the entire ceremony, with the particular emotion of children who'd survived loss and found unexpected restoration. Sarah Porter maintained composure until pronouncing them married, at which point she abandoned dignity in favor of tears that Rebecca would have appreciated. The reception was casual, catered by the Foundation's culinary training program. The students they'd helped now feeding the community that had supported them. Patricia Morrison gave a toast about second chances and choosing to build rather than destroy. Her trajectory from Derek Blackwood's daughter to Foundation director, demonstrating that origin didn't determine destination. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Jonathan found himself alone with Grace in the garden, where they'd married hours before. Noah slept in Sarah's arms inside, Emma exhausted from flower girl duties and social interaction, the house settling into quiet that felt like peace. "We did it." Grace leaned against him, her wedding dress slightly grass-stained from playing with Noah, her hair escaping its careful styling. "Built something real from absolute disaster. Made family from strangers. Prove that being rescued doesn't make you weak if you use the help to become strong." "You did that. I just provided resources and got out of the way while you proved you belonged." Jonathan pulled her closer, breathing in the scent that meant home regardless of physical location. "Thank you for being brave enough to trust me. For accepting help when pride said you shouldn't. For teaching me that love doesn't end when loss happens. It just changes shape and finds new forms if you're courageous enough to let it." They stood in the garden as summer darkness descended. 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build toward best possible future. Inside the house, Emma and Noah represented the family they were becoming. Biology and choice combined into something that mattered more than legal documentation. The Foundation would continue growing, helping more people find paths from survival to success. Grace would return to Parsons and complete her degree, would publish the children's books she'd dreamed of creating. Jonathan would build the kind of success Rebecca had envisioned. Profitable, yes, but measured in lives improved rather than just shareholder value. But all of that was future possibility. Tonight was present reality. 2 people brave enough to risk everything on the belief that being human meant more than just surviving. That love was possible after loss. That rescue and independence weren't opposites, but partners in building the kind of life worth living. And as they walked back toward the house where their children slept and their future waited, Jonathan Hayes felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The particular certainty that came from being exactly where he belonged, with exactly who he belonged with, building exactly what mattered most.